The woman Emrys helped build a dream looked into a camera, smiled, and erased him in front of millions of people. The lights were brighter than anything they had ever imagined. The crowd was on its feet. Callista stood at the center of the stage, surrounded by cameras, reporters, and people who once ignored her. This was the moment they had talked about for years. The moment she finally made it. Emrys watched from the audience with a proud smile. He remembered the nights when Callista cried after failed auditions. The mornings when she wanted to give up. The moments when she questioned whether she was talented enough. He was the person who told her to keep going. The person who believed in her before anyone knew her name. When a reporter stepped forward and asked Callista about her journey, Emrys leaned closer. He expected her to tell the story they both knew. He expected her to remember the small apartment, the rejected applications, and the sacrifices they made together. But her answer froze him. "I did this all by myself." The crowd erupted. People cheered. Cameras flashed. Callista smiled confidently as if those words were the truth. But Emrys sat there silently. Because he knew they weren't. He knew every chapter she had chosen to forget. After the event, Callista found him waiting outside. For a moment, she looked like the woman he had always known. Then her expression changed. "We need to talk," she said. Those 4 words felt heavier than anything else. Inside her luxury hotel room, Callista avoided his eyes. She explained that things were different now. Her career was growing. Her image mattered. People wanted a certain type of story. A certain type of person. "Our relationship doesn't fit anymore," she whispered. Emrys stared at her in disbelief. After 5 years together, after standing beside her through every struggle, he had become a problem. "I need a cleaner image," she said. "A different story. A different life." The hardest part wasn't losing the relationship. It was realizing she had already started leaving long before that night. The next morning, Emrys opened his phone. Thousands of articles about Callista's success filled the internet. He searched her interviews, her biography, her official profile, and then he saw it. A carefully written story about a young woman who fought alone. Who had nobody supporting her. Who achieved everything by herself. His name was nowhere, not even a mention. The person who believed in her before the world did, had already been removed from her story. The world fell in love with Callista's story. Millions watched her interviews. Millions shared her videos. To everyone looking from the outside, she was the perfect example of success. A young woman who started with nothing. A dreamer who refused to quit. A person who fought alone until the world finally noticed her. But Emrys knew something the cameras never showed. He knew the story behind the story. Every morning, his phone was filled with new articles about Callista. Her face appeared on magazine covers. Her name was everywhere. Brands wanted her. Fans admired her. People called her an inspiration. But every time Emrys watched her speak, something felt wrong. The words were always the same. Almost too perfect. "I believed in myself when nobody else did. I had no support. I had to fight alone." The audience loved those words. They made her sound stronger. More inspiring. More relatable. But Emrys remembered different moments. He remembered sitting beside her on the kitchen floor after another rejection. He remembered driving her to auditions when she couldn't afford transportation. He remembered the nights she cried because she thought her dream was impossible. He remembered telling her that one day people would know her name. Now those same moments had disappeared. Not changed. Not forgotten. Erased. At first, Emrys convinced himself that maybe she was just simplifying her story. Maybe fame changed the way people remembered things. Maybe she wasn't trying to hurt him. But then he noticed something else. Every interview followed the same pattern. The same phrases. The same emotions. The same carefully timed pauses. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a performance. Callista had created a version of herself that millions believed. A version where she had no past. No struggles with anyone beside her. No person who stood there before the spotlight arrived. One evening, Emrys watched another interview from a famous entertainment channel. The host smiled and asked Callista about the hardest time in her life. Without hesitation, she gave the same answer. "I had to do everything alone." Emrys quietly turned off the screen. For the first time, he wasn't angry. He was confused. Because he started wondering something he never wanted to believe. Was Callista hiding him because she was embarrassed? Or was there a bigger reason behind the lie? The answer came unexpectedly a few days later. Emrys was leaving a coffee shop when someone from Callista's past approached him. It was Lily, an old friend who knew Callista before fame changed everything. She looked uncomfortable, like she had been carrying a secret for a long time. After a long silence, she finally said, "Emrys, you need to understand something. Callista wasn't always this person." And those words opened a door to a truth Emrys was not prepared to discover. Before the cameras, before the fame, before millions of people knew her name, Callista was just a young woman trying to survive another rejection. And Emrys was the only person who refused to let her give up. Years earlier, their life looked nothing like the glamorous world she lived in now. There were no red carpets, no expensive clothes, no fans waiting outside buildings. There was only a small apartment, unpaid bills, and a dream that seemed impossible. Callista spent years chasing opportunities that never came. She walked into audition rooms full of hope and walked out carrying disappointment. Some days, she barely spoke. Other days, she cried and questioned whether she was talented enough. "I don't think this is meant for me," she once whispered. But Emrys always saw something she couldn't see in herself. He reminded her of every reason she started. He helped her prepare for auditions. He listened when she needed someone to believe in her. When she wanted to quit, he was the voice telling her to try one more time. He never asked for recognition. He never expected anything in return. He simply loved her. And slowly, things began to change. One opportunity became another. A small role became a bigger one. Then suddenly, the world started paying attention. Callista became the person everyone wanted to meet. But somewhere along the way, the woman who once needed Emrys became the woman who acted like she had never known him. She told interviewers she had fought alone. She accepted awards for overcoming struggles nobody knew about. She allowed the world to believe she had reached the top without anyone beside her. And Emrys watched quietly. People around him told him to expose the truth. They told him to show everyone the real story. He had messages, photos, memories, proof that he was there before the spotlight. But every time he thought about revealing everything, he stopped. Because despite everything, he still cared about her. He wasn't interested in destroying Callista. He just wished she remembered the person who stood beside her before the world started applauding. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. A production company announced they were creating a documentary about Callista's incredible rise. They wanted to discover the person behind the celebrity. They wanted to uncover the real story of how she became famous. At first, Emrys thought it was just another project celebrating her success. But then he saw the title of the documentary, The Untold Story of Callista. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt before. Hope, because maybe the truth he had been carrying alone was finally about to come to light. The spotlight that made Callista famous was slowly becoming the thing she feared the most. From the outside, her life looked perfect. Millions of followers, luxury events, magazine covers, a career that many people dreamed of having. Every photo showed confidence, every interview showed happiness, every appearance made people believe Callista had finally reached the life she always wanted. But behind the cameras, things were different. Much different. The woman who once fought for every opportunity was now fighting to protect a carefully created image. Her management team had a plan for everything. They decided what questions she should answer. They approved what stories she could share. They even advised her on which people from her past should stay hidden. People don't want complicated stories, her manager told her. They want someone they can admire. And that meant removing anything that didn't fit the image. The struggles, the mistakes, the people who helped her along the way, including Emrys. At first, Callista believed it was just part of being successful. She told herself that every celebrity had to protect their reputation. But slowly, she started feeling trapped. She couldn't speak freely. She couldn't tell her own story. Every word had to be approved. Every memory had to be edited. The hardest part was knowing that the story everyone loved wasn't completely real. Her fans believed she was the woman who achieved everything alone. But Callista knew there was a missing chapter. A chapter about the person who stood beside her when nobody else cared. A chapter about the man she erased. Meanwhile, the documentary team continued investigating her rise to fame. They interviewed producers. They spoke with old friends. They searched through years of forgotten moments. At first, Callista wasn't worried. She believed there was nothing they could find. But then one of the researchers on the documentary discovered something unexpected. A forgotten recording. An old video from years before Callista became famous. A video that had never been seen by the public. A video recorded during the hardest time of her life. The documentary producer watched the footage carefully. And within seconds, everyone in the room became silent. Because standing beside the young, struggling Callista, was the one person she claimed never existed. Emrys. The man behind the success. The man was removed from the story. The video was proof that the world had only seen half the truth. And now, the question was no longer whether Callista's past would come out. It was what would happen when millions of people finally saw it. The truth Callista tried to hide for years was sitting inside an old recording file. A video nobody remembered. A moment nobody was supposed to see. The documentary team had spent weeks searching through Callista's past. They expected to find old interviews, forgotten performances, and early career struggles. But they found something much more powerful. A small video file buried among old audition recordings. The date on the file was from years before Callista became famous. Before the expensive clothes. Before the fans. Before the spotlight. The producer opened the video. And the room became silent. On the screen was a younger Callista sitting inside a small apartment. She looked nothing like the confident celebrity the world knew today. Her eyes were red from crying. Audition papers were scattered across the table. Another rejection. Another dream that seemed further away. I can't keep doing this, the younger Callista whispered. I think maybe I'm not good enough. The documentary team watched carefully. Because this wasn't the story Callista shared with the world. This was the real person behind the celebrity. Then someone else appeared in the video. Emrys. He walked into the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside her without hesitation. He didn't tell her to be realistic. He didn't tell her to quit. He reminded her of who she was. You've come too far to stop now, Emrys said. Callista looked down and shook her head. What if nobody ever knows my name? Emrys smiled softly. One day they will know your name. Don't give up before they do. Those words stayed with everyone watching. Because they showed something the world had never seen. Before millions of fans believed in Callista, Emrys believed in her. Before the awards, before the interviews, before the success, there was a man standing beside her when she had nothing to offer. The documentary producer leaned back in silence. The entire story had changed. The woman who claimed she built everything alone had once depended on someone who loved her enough to stay during her darkest moments. The video wasn't just proof of Emrys' support. It was proof that Callista had rewritten her own history. And now the biggest question was no longer about fame. It was about betrayal. Why would someone erase the person who helped them become who they are? The producer looked at the screen one more time. Then he turned to the team and quietly asked, why did she pretend he never existed? Nobody had an answer, but everyone knew they had just uncovered the missing piece of Callista's story. For years, Emrys believed Callista erased him because she was embarrassed by him. But the truth was much more painful. She wasn't ashamed of him. She was ashamed of herself. After the old video was discovered, Callista could no longer hide behind the perfect image she had created. The documentary team wanted answers. The public wanted answers. And for the first time in years, Callista had to face the part of her past she tried so hard to bury. She sat down for an interview away from the cameras and the bright lights. No makeup, no prepared speech, no carefully written answers, just Callista, and the truth she had been running from. I didn't hate where I came from, she admitted. I hated who I was when I was there. She explained that after becoming successful, everything around her changed. Her team started shaping her image. They told her fans didn't want complicated stories. They wanted someone perfect. Someone who looked like they achieved everything through strength and determination alone. They said her past struggles made her look weak. They said the people around her before fame didn't belong in the story anymore. Especially Emrys. They told me people wanted a success story, Callista said quietly. They didn't want to hear about the person who helped me survive. Her managers convinced her that keeping Emrys hidden would protect her career. They told her that being connected to an ordinary man would make people question her new image. And slowly, she started believing them. She allowed strangers to rewrite her story. She allowed them to remove the person who loved her before anyone knew her name. But the hardest part was admitting the truth. Nobody forced her to forget Emrys. Nobody made the final decision for her. She chose silence. And that choice hurt the person who had always stood beside her. Emrys watched the interview with mixed emotions. For the first time, he understood that Callista's betrayal wasn't because she thought he wasn't valuable. It was because she had lost sight of her own value. But just as he started to understand her pain, another discovery changed everything. While reviewing old documents connected to the documentary, Emrys noticed something strange. The public story about Callista's rise wasn't created by her alone. Someone else had been helping shape the lie. Someone who knew exactly what happened before the fame. Someone who knew Emrys existed. And someone who helped remove him from the story. Emrys stared at the evidence in disbelief. Because the biggest secret was no longer what Callista had hidden. It was who helped her hide it. The biggest lie in Callista's story was never created by her alone. Someone else helped build it. Someone else decided what the world would believe. And that person was the man standing closest to her success. Her manager, Adrian. For years, Adrian had been presented as the person who helped Callista become a star. The professional who guided her career. The person who opened doors and created opportunities. But behind closed doors, he was doing something much darker. He was creating a version of Callista that didn't truly exist. After discovering the hidden documents, Emrys and the documentary team began looking deeper into Callista's rise. They found messages between Adrian and his public relations team. The conversations revealed a shocking truth. Callista's perfect success story was not an accident. It was carefully designed. Adrian believed that audiences did not want complicated people. He believed they wanted heroes. A young woman who struggled alone. A woman who needed nobody. A woman who built everything without help. That story was easier to sell. It made Callista more inspiring, more valuable, more marketable, and anyone who did not fit that story had to disappear, including Emrys. Adrian convinced Callista that her old life was holding her back. He told her that people would judge her if they knew she had depended on someone before becoming famous. He told her that a relationship with an ordinary man would weaken her image. At first, Callista resisted. She knew Emrys had been there for her. She knew he deserved recognition. But Adrian kept pushing. He reminded her of everything she could lose. Her opportunities, her reputation, her future. Slowly, fear replaced gratitude. And Callista made the decision that changed everything. She allowed the world to believe a lie. A lie that erased the person who believed in her before anyone else did. When the truth started coming out, Adrian wasn't worried about what he had done. He was worried about losing control. He confronted Callista privately after discovering she planned to tell the full story. His calm professional attitude disappeared. "You don't understand what happens if you destroy this image," he warned. Callista looked at him silently. For the first time, she saw him clearly. He wasn't protecting her career. He was protecting the story that made him powerful. "If you tell the truth," Adrian continued, "everything you built disappears." Those words stayed with her. Because she finally understood something. The spotlight had not only hidden her past. It had trapped her inside someone else's version of reality. And now she had to choose. Protect the lie that made her famous. Or reveal the truth that could cost her everything. The same spotlight that made Callista famous was now exposing everything she tried to hide. For years, millions of people believed they knew her story. They believed she was the woman who fought alone. The woman who built everything from nothing. The woman who needed nobody's help. But when the documentary finally aired, the world saw a different version of Callista. The first few minutes changed everything. The old video of her struggling before fame. The moments with Emrys. The evidence showing that someone had stood beside her when nobody else believed in her. And then came the truth about Adrian. The manager who helped create the perfect story. The man who convinced Callista that honesty was dangerous. Within hours, the documentary became the biggest conversation everywhere. Social media exploded. News channels discussed it. Fans shared their opinions. But not everyone reacted the same way. Some people felt betrayed. They said Callista lied to everyone who supported her. They believed she had stolen someone else's sacrifices and turned them into her own success story. She didn't just forget him, one fan said. She erased him. But others saw a more complicated truth. They understood that Callista had been influenced by fear. They saw a young woman who became trapped inside an image she was expected to maintain. They believed she made a terrible choice, but they also believed she was more than her mistake. For Callista, the reaction was overwhelming. The fame that once protected her now became impossible to escape. Every interview she had given was questioned. Every award speech was analyzed. Every success she celebrated now carried a painful reminder of the person she left behind. Brands began stepping away. Opportunities slowed down. The carefully built image that took years to create started collapsing in a matter of days. But the hardest part wasn't losing fame. It was realizing that the person she hurt the most was the person who never tried to hurt her back. Emrys watched everything unfold quietly. People expected him to celebrate her downfall. They expected anger. They expected revenge. But that was never who he was. He didn't want to destroy Callista. He wanted the truth to finally exist. Then, as the documentary continued reaching millions of viewers, Emrys found something that changed the entire situation. Something that connected every missing piece. A final piece of evidence that had been hidden for years. A piece of proof that could reveal exactly how deep the manipulation went. He held it in his hands, knowing that once the world saw it, there would be no going back. Because this wasn't just about Callista anymore. It was about everyone who helped create the lie. And Emrys had the one thing that could expose everything. The world was waiting for Emrys to destroy her. After everything that happened, people believed he had every right to expose Callista completely. He had the evidence. He had the truth. He had the power to bring down the person who erased him from her story. Millions of people wanted to see him fight back. They expected anger. They expected revenge. They expected him to release every private conversation, every hidden detail, and every painful moment Callista tried to forget. But Emrys did something nobody expected. He refused. When reporters approached him outside the documentary studio, they asked about the evidence he had discovered. They wanted a dramatic statement. They wanted a headline. They wanted him to say that Callista deserved everything coming to her. But Emrys remained calm. He looked at the cameras and said something that surprised everyone. "I don't want revenge." The reporters became silent. "I just wanted the truth." Those words changed the way people saw him. Because Emrys was not trying to win. He was not trying to replace Callista in the spotlight. He was not trying to make the world hate her. For years, he had carried the pain quietly. He had watched someone he loved rewrite their history. He had watched strangers celebrate a story that left him invisible. But deep inside, he knew something important. Destroying Callista would not bring back the years they lost. Making her suffer would not heal the hurt. The truth was enough. For the first time, Emrys chose peace over pain. He gave the evidence to the documentary team, but he refused to use it as a weapon. He allowed people to understand what happened without turning the situation into a public attack. That decision surprised even the people who supported him. Some wondered why he showed mercy to someone who had hurt him so deeply. But Emrys understood something they didn't. Holding on to anger would only keep him connected to the worst moment of his life. Meanwhile, Callista watched everything unfold. She expected him to destroy her. She expected him to reveal the worst parts of her past. Instead, he protected her dignity when he had every reason not to. And that was when she discovered something that broke her heart. The person she thought she had lost because he was ordinary, was the same person who made the biggest sacrifices when nobody was watching. She learned about the opportunities Emrys gave up, the dreams he delayed, the moments he stood beside her while asking for nothing in return. For years, Callista believed she was the one who lost something by leaving him behind. But now she realized the truth. She had lost someone who loved her before the world knew her name. And the hardest part was knowing. He never stopped believing in her. For the first time in years, Callista stood in front of Emrys without a camera between them. No reporters, no fans, no manager telling her what to say, no carefully prepared story, just two people facing the truth they had both been avoiding. The woman everyone knew as a superstar was gone. In her place was the young woman Emrys remembered. The woman who once cried after auditions. The woman who once believed her dream was impossible. The woman he promised would one day be known by the world. Callista looked at him quietly. And for the first time, she stopped defending herself. "I hurt you," she said. The words were simple, but they carried years of regret. She admitted that she had spent so much time chasing approval from strangers that she forgot the person who had always believed in her. She chased applause from millions of people who only knew her success. But she ignored the one person who knew her struggles. The person who saw her before the fame. Before the money. Before the recognition. Emrys listened without interrupting. Part of him wanted to ask why she didn't fight for him. Why did she allow someone else to erase their history? Why she chose a perfect image over a real relationship? But seeing her finally accept responsibility changed something. Because this wasn't the confident celebrity who stood on stages and gave perfect answers. This was Callista admitting she made a mistake. "I thought if people knew the truth about my past, they would see me differently," she explained. "I was afraid they would stop believing in me." Emrys looked at her and realized something painful. She wasn't running from him. She was running from the person she used to be. The conversation gave both of them something they hadn't had in years. Honesty. But forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. The damage was real. The trust that had been broken could not return overnight. And Callista knew there was still one final decision she had to make. Her management team wanted her to stay quiet. They told her the scandal would eventually disappear. They told her protecting her brand mattered more than reopening old wounds. But deep inside, Callista knew the truth. She could continue protecting the image she built. She could continue letting the world believe a carefully edited version of her life. Or she could finally tell the complete story. The story of the people who helped her. The story of the sacrifices behind her success. The story that included Emrys. For years, Callista had chosen fame over truth. Now she had one final choice. Protect the celebrity everyone loves. Or become the honest person she once promised herself she would be. The world expected Callista to give another perfect performance. Years later, Callista finally understood something fame could never teach her. A perfect image might attract millions of people. But only the truth can create something that lasts. The woman who once built her career around a carefully created story was now respected for a completely different reason. Her honesty. Callista's life after the scandal was not the same. She no longer stood on stages pretending she had done everything alone. She no longer hid the people who helped her. Instead, she became known as someone who admitted her mistakes and accepted responsibility for the choices she made. Some people never forgave her. And she understood that. She learned that rebuilding trust takes much longer than breaking it. But slowly, people began to see the person behind the celebrity. Not the perfect star. Not the carefully designed image. Just Callista. Meanwhile, Emrys created a life far away from the noise of fame. He built his own success. Not with cameras watching. Not with millions of people cheering. But through hard work, patience, and the values he had always carried. He became successful in a way that mattered to him. A meaningful life. A peaceful life. A life where he didn't need recognition from strangers to know his worth. Then, years later, their paths crossed again. Not at a movie premiere. Not at an award ceremony. Not under the pressure of cameras. They met at a charity event. A place built around helping others. When Callista saw Emrys standing across the room, she stopped for a moment. The years between them disappeared. She remembered the person who believed in her before anyone knew her name. The person who stayed when success seemed impossible. The person she once tried to remove from her story. But standing there, she realized something. He was never a chapter she needed to erase. He was part of the reason the story existed. Their conversation was different this time. There were no excuses, no anger, no need to prove who was right. Only understanding. They both knew the past could not be changed. But they also knew the truth had finally been told. The world eventually learned what really happened. The person Callista erased from her journey was the person who helped her become the person everyone celebrated. And that truth became more powerful than any award or headline. Because fame can introduce you to millions of people. It can put your name in front of the world. But it cannot replace the one person who believed in you before anyone knew who you were. Sometimes the greatest supporters are not standing under the spotlight. Sometimes they are standing quietly beside you, waiting for you to remember they were there all along.